Let's dive into the world of form handling in React. In this session, we will explore how to create and manage forms using controlled components, which are a fundamental aspect of building interactive user interfaces in React. We will focus on building interactive forms that provide real-time feedback and validation, ensuring a smooth and efficient user experience. So, get ready to master the art of form handling in React. Let's understand what controlled components are in React. Controlled components are form elements whose values are controlled by reactState. This means that the component itself becomes the single source of truth for the input data. Now, let's talk about the key characteristics of controlled components. Firstly, the value is stored in the component state. Secondly, updates are handled by event handlers. Thirdly, React controls the input behavior. And finally, controlled components are predictable and testable. Let's look at a basic example of a controlled input in React. Here's the code snippet. We declare a state variable called name and a function to update it, setName, using the useState hook. In the return statement, we have an input element. The value property of the input is bound to the name state. The onChange event handler is used to update the name state whenever the input value changes. Now let's understand how it works. First, the state holds the current value of the input. Second, the input displays the value that is stored in the state. Third, the onChange event triggers the setName function, which updates the state with the new value. Fourth, the component re-renders with the new value, ensuring that the input always reflects the current state. Let's take a look at a complete form component example. Here's the code for a contact form component. We declare two state variables, email and message, along with their corresponding update functions, setEmail and setMessage, using the useState hook. We define a handleSubmit function that prevents the default form submission behavior and logs the email and message values to the console. In the return statement, we have a form element with an onSubmit handler set to handleSubmit. Inside the form, we have an input element for the email and a text area element for the message. Both elements are controlled components, with their value properties bound to the corresponding state variables, and their onChange handlers updating the state accordingly. Let's explore form validation in React. Here's a basic example of email validation. We declare a state variable errors to store any validation errors. We define a validate email function that uses a regular expression to test if an email is valid. We update the handleSubmit function to prevent the default form submission behavior and create a new errors object to store any validation errors. If the validate email function returns false, we add an error message to the new errors object for the email field. Finally, we call setErrors to update the errors state with the new errors object. Now, let's talk about validation benefits. Firstly, real-time user feedback. Secondly, it prevents invalid data submission. Thirdly, it provides improved user experience. And fourthly, it reduces server-side errors. Let's see how to handle multiple input types in React forms. Here's how you can handle checkboxes and select inputs. For a checkbox, we bind the check property to a state variable called isSubscribed and update the state using setIsSubscribed when the checkbox value changes. For a select input, we bind the value property to a state variable called country and update the state using setCountry when the selected option changes. Here's how to handle radio buttons. For radio buttons, we bind the check property to a condition that checks if the plan state variable matches the radio button's value. We update the plan state using setPlan when the radio button selection changes. Let's talk about form state management in React. For managing form state, especially in complex forms, the useReducer hook can be a powerful alternative to useState. Here's an example of using useReducer for form state management. We define a form reducer function that takes the current state and an action as arguments and returns the new state based on the action type. We use a switch statement to handle different action types. In this case, we have an update underscore field action that updates a specific field in the state with the new value. We use the useReducer hook to create a form data state variable and a dispatch function. We pass the formReducer function and an initial state object to useReducer. Now let's talk about best practices. Firstly, use a single state object for complex forms. Secondly, use useReducer for complex state logic. Thirdly, use custom hooks for reusable form logic. And fourthly, use debounce validation for performance. Let's summarize the key takeaways from this session. Controlled components drive form behavior, making data flow predictable and testable. Real-time feedback improves user experience and data quality through validation. Choose the right approach based on form complexity and requirements for state management. Optimize with debouncing and efficient re-rendering strategies for performance. Finally, controlled components provide the foundation for building robust, user-friendly forms in React. If you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Visit CodeLucky.com for more such useful content.